I mentioned last week that the course outline has a lot less stuff on it than is in the next 4 chapters of your book. And so we're going to kind of pick and choose. And so I've done my best on chapter 12 here to summarize and just pull out the big ideas. This chapter is about biochemical energy production, and it has some really important concepts in it. And then the course outline specifies that we talk about the metabolism of lipids, carbohydrates, and proteins. And so we'll finish those up maybe Wednesday and after the exam on Monday. So these are big ideas of energy production. So what does metabolism mean? Metabolism is all of the chemical reactions that occur in a living organism. That's what we mean by metabolism. There are 2 categories of metabolism: catabolism and anabolism. When I see this word, I think of cannibals. I know that's not an N there, but this word reminds me of cannibals. What do cannibals do? They eat other people. Ew, right? Stay with me, though. Catabolism is the metabolic reactions in which large molecules are broken down into smaller ones. So when a cannibal eats another human, right, they're going to break them down into smaller pieces. That's a catabolic reaction. Oops. When I see the word anabolism, I think of anabolic steroids. Why do guys take anabolic steroids? To get bigger, to build their muscles up and make themselves larger. Well, anabolic reactions are those in which smaller molecules are joined together to form larger ones. So we've got this little summary diagram here. Large molecules becoming smaller ones. That usually produces energy, right? And when we take these smaller molecules and make them into larger ones, that usually requires energy. So both of these types of reactions are important in keeping your body going. There are metabolic pathways. The metabolism is a series of many chemical reactions. It's not just one chemical reaction where we take the sugar and we make it into proteins or something. It's a complicated series of reactions. And so we talk about metabolic pathways, and those are a series of consecutive reactions that are used to convert a starting material into an end product. And so we're going to talk kind of generally about some metabolic pathways without going into much detail of the specific reactions that occur. And there's 2 kinds of metabolic pathways. There's linear and cyclic. And so a linear pathway starts with one thing and it goes through a series of reactions and it ends up with something else. And then it's done. A cyclic pathway is something that just goes around and around and around. And it's taking things in and it's spitting things out. But it's a cycle. And we'll see both kinds. So classify each of the following chemical processes as anabolic or catabolic. Synthesis of a protein from amino acids. Anabolic. This is making it bigger. It's building up. So that's anabolic. How about formation of a triacylglycerol from glycerol and fatty acids? Anabolic. We're taking smaller things and putting them together. Hydrolysis of a polysaccharide to monosaccharides. That's catabolic. We're taking a big thing and making it smaller. How about formation of a nucleic acid from nucleotides? Anabolic. Metabolic reactions, oh, I made a typo there. Metabolic reactions, should be an S, occur at specific sites within cells. This is an illustration of one type of a cell, and there's the nucleus, and we have ribosomes here. A lot of them are, what are these guys? I don't know. I am not a biologist. We have endoplasmic reticulum, thank you. And here we've got the mitochondria. And so there are these different areas within the cell, and these metabolic reactions occur in different places. A cell is not just like a Ziploc bag full of stuff where reactions occur. I am not going to try to teach you or make you memorize where all these things happen, because I figure whatever class you need this class for, they're going to teach you what you need to know there, okay? And some of you could really school me in parts of a cell, because I took biology in high school, and that was a long, long time ago. Not my favorite subject. So what do we need to know? Well, adenosine phosphates are very important, and we've mentioned these before. So there's the monophosphate, the diphosphate, the triphosphate, and then there's also a cyclic monophosphate. And these are abbreviated AMP, ADP, ATP, and CAMP for cyclic adenosine monophosphate. And here's just kind of in a block structure what these look like. They have adenine, which is a base that we're familiar with, and ribose, and phosphate. And this one has 1, this one has 2, this one has 3 phosphates. ATP is the energy form that is stored within the cells. And ATP is obtained by oxidation of the food that you eat. So it's a source of energy for the cells. It's also a source of phosphate, because there are reactions that need phosphate, and the phosphate will come from the ATP. So this summarizes the reactions that can occur. The ATP can I believe this is hydrolysis, isn't it? Can be hydrolyzed to ADP, and this PI stands for inorganic phosphate, and one phosphate comes off, and a hydrogen ion comes off, and energy is released. That ADP, which still has 2 phosphates now, can also be hydrolyzed and another phosphate come off and more energy. Or you can look at an overall reaction of ATP to AMP. And the other triphosphates, UTP, GTP, and CTP, also participate in metabolism. And this is uridine and guanine and cytosine, with 3 phosphates or 2 phosphates or 1 phosphate on them. There are also some important nucleotide-containing compounds. So this is flavin adenine dinucleotide, abbreviated FAD. This is a coenzyme that's required in a number of metabolic redox reactions. So it's composed of a flavin and ribitol, which is a form of ribose, and ADP, adenosine diphosphate. So it has this nucleotide in it. And the basic thing that it does is it does oxidation reduction. It accepts and donates electrons. So here we have the FAD accepting 2 electrons. Gaining electrons is reduction, and that forms the FADH2. Losing electrons is oxidation. So we've got reduction and oxidation. And the FAD goes back and forth to the FADH2 as needed, providing electrons back and forth. And here's the actual structure of it. Here we've got the adenine, and there's the ribose, well, the ribitol. No, this is the ribitol. This is the, I think that's deoxyribose, isn't it? I don't know. The sugar. There's the sugar. And there's the 2-phosphorus, and the ribitol, and the flavin. Another one is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. So here we have nicotinamide and ribose, and here we have the ADP. And this is also a coenzyme. In this one, the nicotinamide is the active form. It's the nicotinamide that's accepting and donating the electrons. But this is abbreviated NAD, and it undergoes an oxidation reduction reaction like this. And this is just kind of a block diagram of what it is. And you see these abbreviations thrown around all the time, right? You've seen those in biology? Yeah, because they are very much involved with metabolism and all of these biochemical reactions that occur. Another one's coenzyme A. This is a derivative of pantothenic acid, which is a vitamin B. This one has a function not to oxidize and reduce, but to transfer acetyl groups. It's a combination of 2-aminoethane thiol, which is a sulfur alcohol, basically, a thiol, pantothenic acid, and phosphorylated ADP. So you've got ADP that's phosphorylated. The active form is the sulfhydryl group, the SH group, the thiol group. So here we have, it's often abbreviated like this, CoA, with the SH group hanging out, because this is the part that does something. And so it can bond with an acetyl group, and then it can take that and transfer that acetyl group to other molecules. And that's basically what it does, is it just goes back and forth between the CoA form and the acetyl-CoA form. So we can classify these different metabolic intermediates. The ATPs are intermediates for storage of energy and transfer of phosphate groups. FAD and NAD are intermediates for transfer of electrons. And the acetyl-CoA is an intermediate for the transfer of acetyl groups. So these are kind of like subcontractors. You need somebody to do plumbing. You need somebody to, you need an electrician. Oh, well, call in FAD because he can transfer electrons for you. So let's give the abbreviated formula for the following metabolic intermediate compounds. The intermediate produced when NADH is oxidized. Okay, remember there's two definitions of oxidation. Losing electrons is oxidation, gaining is reduction. That's oil rig, right? In organic chemistry, we talk about oxidation being gaining oxygen or increasing the number of carbon-oxygen bonds. The opposite of that is losing hydrogen. So oxidation is losing hydrogen, reduction is gaining hydrogen. So oxidation would be losing hydrogen. So we need to lose a hydrogen? No. Yeah. Yeah, it'll be NAD+, sorry. Far too much thinking going on here. It is Monday. It's a very Monday. The intermediate produced when NAD+ is reduced. NADH. The intermediate product produced when a phosphate group is added to AMP. ADP. Because AMP is adenine monophosphate. We add a phosphate, it becomes the diphosphate. The intermediate produced when CoA-SH bonds to an acetyl group. Acetyl, S, CoA. Or you could write it the other way. You could write it CoA-acetyl, S, acetyl. Like, oh, we could just put the word acetyl. Yeah, you can just put the word acetyl in there. So I'm skipping lots and lots of details in this chapter, but recognizing that these two are related, NADH and NAD+. And what do they do? What's the function of these guys? They transfer electrons. What's the function of this guy? Energy and source of phosphate. And what's the function of this guy? Transfer acetyl groups. Okay, so there's 3 groups. There's only, if we go back to this, there are other TPs. There's the G and the U and the C. We're not going to really talk about them. So really, because they do similar things, they're just kind of specialized. So here's one compound, and here's 2 compounds, and here's one more. So we've got 4 things that we need to remember. That's not too much. What they do and how they do it. Okay, so basically what I'm saying is this table is important, really important. Did that. So biochemical energy production. The energy that keeps your body going comes from food, right? I think we kind of all know that just by being alive. You have to eat eventually. You can fast for a while, but eventually you have to eat because that's where the energy comes from. The production of the energy is a multi-step process that involves several different catabolic pathways. So taking larger molecules and breaking them down. There's 4 general stages. There's digestion, the formation of acetyl groups, the citric acid cycle, and then the electron transport chain and oxidative phosphorylation. These 2 are coupled processes, meaning they occur at the same time, and the one provides energy for the other. Each of these stages has several reactions in it. So digestion starts in your mouth. And that's why, you've often heard, you need to chew your food more, don't swallow it whole. Well, that's actually good advice. There are enzymes in your mouth that begin to digest the food. And so when you're chewing your food, you're breaking it into smaller pieces, you're mixing the enzymes with it, and you're getting the digestion started. It continues in your stomach, where gastric juices, there's acid in there, they work on your food, and it's completed in your small intestine. That's where the digestion finishes. The result of this is that you get small molecules that can cross the intestinal membrane and go into your blood. We have to take the food molecules, proteins and large starches and things, and break them into smaller pieces that can get into your blood, and then your body can take them around where it's needed and do stuff with them. So the end products, and this ties into the metabolism of these 3 different sorts of foods. Carbohydrates yield glucose and other monosaccharides. Proteins yield amino acids, and fats and oils yield fatty acids and glycerol. So these are the lipids, the proteins, and the carbohydrates. So these digestion products get absorbed into your blood, and they get transported to your cells, and then those cells do other things to them. So step 2, acetyl group formation. So those small molecules from stage 1 are further oxidized. And the end product of those oxidations is acetyl-CoA. We'll learn when we talk about carbohydrate metabolism and actually lipid metabolism does this too. It cuts off these little sections from the larger molecule and makes acetyl groups, which attach to that CoA, and then it goes off and does stuff with them. So there's a lot of reactions that occur. You've got glucose metabolism, which occurs in the cytosol, And in the mitochondria, you've got fatty acid metabolism. The citric acid cycle takes place in the mitochondria. It's also known as the Krebs cycle. The first intermediate of this is citric acid, and that's where this whole cycle gets its name. This is a cyclic metabolic pathway. The acetyl group gets oxidized to produce carbon dioxide and energy. And the carbon, there's a typo, that's not my typo. That's the publisher's typo, carbon oxide. There's no such thing. Carbon dioxide that you exhale in your breath primarily comes from this citric acid cycle. The energy that's generated is mostly trapped in the reduced enzymes NADH and FADH2. Some of the energy that's produced here is lost in the form of heat. When you metabolize these things, it generates heat, which is part of why when you're in a cold situation and you're not appropriately dressed, you need to consume a lot more calories because your body uses that to generate heat. And then the last stage is electron transport chain and oxidative phosphorylation. This happens in the mitochondria. Here, the NADH and the FADH2s that were formed in the citric acid cycle are oxidized and release hydrogen ions and electrons. The hydrogen ions are transported into the intermembrane space. The electrons are transferred to oxygen, and the oxygen is reduced to H2O. We need to breathe oxygen in, and we exhale the carbon dioxide. The hydrogen ions drive ATP synthase to produce ATP, and ATP is the primary energy carrier in the metabolic pathways. So all of this is going along to make ATP. So the citric acid cycle, series of biochemical reactions, a cyclic pathway. The big idea here is that the acetyl portion of acetyl-CoA gets oxidized to carbon dioxide, and we produce these reduced enzymes. Here, if you're interested, is the overall reaction. There's a lot of stuff going on there. So we're taking these oxidized forms of the coenzymes and we're reducing them. And we're taking GDP and making GTP. The more phosphates it has, the more energy it has. This is a nice, simple overview of the citric acid cycle. One of the very few things I remember about my 3 graduate level biochemistry classes was sitting in a dark room and staring at the citric acid cycle written in white chalk on a black chalkboard. And it wasn't simple like this. It was all of the atoms shown. And we had to memorize it and be able to just write it down for the professor. Fabulous. So I did it, and then I promptly deleted that from my memory, apparently. But this is the starting point, and it goes around, and there's all these different reactions that occur. And it comes back here, and you've got new stuff coming in. See, this is the in. Acetyl-CoA comes in, and it goes around again. And so you feed acetyl-CoA into it, and it just keeps going and going. And it is not out of control. It is the rate at which it operates is controlled, and it's controlled by the levels of ATP and NADH. So if you've got high ATP, you don't need the citric acid cycle to be going very fast at all. And so it inhibits one of the enzymes, and the whole thing slows down. When ATP, which is the energy storage, drops low, the ADP, which is less energetic than the ATP, activates that enzyme and gets things going again. And ADP and NADH also control one of the other enzymes in the citric acid cycle. So what do you need to know about that? It's regulated by enzymes, and that regulation depends on the the levels of ATP and NADH. And then we talked about the electron transport chain. What's that? Well, that's a series of reactions in which electrons and hydrogen ions from NADH and FADH2 are passed to intermediate carriers. And then those ultimately react with molecular oxygen to produce water. Where does that oxygen come from? It comes from you breathing in air. So you breathe in air. This is the overall reaction, that oxygen combines with the electrons and hydrogen to form water, and this produces energy. That energy is then used to make ATP. And there's actually 8 steps in this, involving 4 different complexes. And I think it's several pages in your book. And we're just going to look at this one picture. There are 4 different complexes, and this is occurring on the inner mitochondrial membrane. And we've talked about the structure of these lipid bilayer membranes. So these complexes are proteins that are present within the membrane. And we just kind of mentioned those before. But these 4 different complexes are involved in this series of reactions. So this first one, we get the NADH reacting to form NAD+. And we've got the FADH2 going to FAD. That operates on this coenzyme Q, which we haven't talked about. It goes through here, through cytochrome C, and comes out here, and then it ultimately causes oxygen to be reacted into water. So we've got electrons moving this. This is electrochemical, and that's why NAD and FAD are involved here. Their job is to transfer electrons. There's a second function that 3 of these complexes have, and that is they are proton pumps. Remember when we talked about transport across these bilipid membranes, or bilayer membranes? There was active transport, and so here we have these complexes are pumping hydrogen ions. These are not being diffused because it's a lower concentration over here. The hydrogen ions are being pumped up here to increase the hydrogen ion concentration over here, and then that later drives another reaction, powers it. So this is like taking water up to the top, and then it's going to run down in a different place and turn a turbine that's going to cause something good to happen that requires energy. Oxidative phosphorylation is coupled with that electron chain. And this is the process by which ATP is synthesized from ADP. It's a result of the electrons and hydrogen ions that get transferred during that electron chain reaction. And these are coupled reactions. Coupled reactions are pairs of biochemical reactions that occur at the same time. And the energy released by one is used to power the other. So the oxidative phosphorylation and the oxidation reactions of the electron transport chain are coupled together. They happen at the same time. So the electron transport chain is pumping hydrogen ions into this intermembrane space. That's the electron transport chain. The oxidative phosphorylation uses that high hydrogen ion concentration to power the synthesis of ATP from ADP. So this is the water coming down and turning the turbine, and now we're charging up the batteries. I think of ATP as being a little bit like a charged up battery. It can provide energy, but it'll just sit there and wait until it's needed. So then this slide puts all 4 steps together. Well, I guess it doesn't do digestion, but so from digestion you get these acetyl groups, and they enter the citric acid cycle. The citric acid cycle is generating carbon dioxide, which goes out as you exhale. And it's also generating NADH and FADH2. And so these are the products of this citric acid cycle. These go over here. They do the electron transport chain thing, converting oxygen to water, and also pumping hydrogen ions to the other side of the membrane, and that powers the formation of ATP. So this is the big picture. This whole ATP, ADP cycle back and forth is just really important in terms of the metabolic processes and the energy exchange. So you've got food catabolism, where your body is making use of the carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, and it does that to generate ATP. And this causes your body to have the energy to do life processes, cellular work, your muscles contracting so that you can breathe and your heart can pump blood, nutrient transport, synthesis of essential compounds. You get a cut and your body needs to make more collagen and more skin cells. All that requires energy. As a result of doing all this work, the ADP is made back into ADP. And then you've got this food catabolism that regenerates it. So the ATP, ADP, is just really the medium in between that's transferring the energy back and forth. B vitamins, we talked a bit about vitamins in the enzyme chapter, and we said that B vitamins were coenzymes. They function as coenzymes in these metabolic pathways. Niacin is needed for you to have nicotinamide adenine, sorry, I can't talk today. Nicotinamide adenine diphosphate, dinucleotide, sorry, NAD. I'll just stick to the abbreviations. Riboflavin is needed for FAD, FADH2, and FMN. It's the flavin that's in these that's important. Thiamine is needed in TPP, pantothenic acid in CoA. So if you don't have these B vitamins, then your body can't use your food to make energy, and that's going to be a problem. End of chapter.